Welcome to the Crafty Mini, and in this one I'm going to go through this miniature, this scale bust that I did for a competition piece. Came back third, which was good. Did pretty well in this one. It was real fun to paint. So in this one I'm going to show you just some of the steps that I do, not every single bit of detail, and just how I went about it. But an absolute joy to paint and full of details. So as I mentioned, we're going to concentrate on just certain areas of the actual bust itself. So I've got it all base coated and mounted here, and we're going to start off with the flesh. So because I'm going to do dwarf Caucasian skin tone, so I'm going to start off with this base coat here of tan flesh, a couple of thin layers just to build up the opacity and get a nice even coat, and then we're going to go work on the highlights. What I tend to do as well is after this first coat's on and dry, and I've got full opacity over the base coat, I'm going to go in with extremely watered down Resin flashlight just to pick out some of the key little areas, the creases in his nose, his brow, the curvature of the ears, things like that. Pick those little bits out, same as on the hand, it'll do all in between the fingers and whatnot, and then we'll go in and start re-highlighting up in the next few steps. Right, so because the Resin flesh shade will darken and just put a colour over the skin slightly, I'm going to go in now with the initial base coat again, just picking out a few areas where I want the highlights to start punching up, and then we're going to go in and add progressively more. I use bright ivory for this particular skin tone, just because it desaturates it a little bit, but also it keeps that little bit of warmth, whereas like a white would be just almost, it'd kill that colour in the skin too much. And you can see here I'm picking out he's got really nice pronounced cheekbones, the top curves of his ears, his brow, which is quite forward, and he's got this quite chunky bulbous nose with some really nice areas to pick out as well. And just going to go through now, take my time and just pick out these key areas. And for this one I've just zoomed right in so you can see all the little areas that I'm actually picking out on the miniature. So he's got really pronounced little sort of bags under his eyes, his cheeks are really quite sharp and angular, so they'll get a nice little highlight at the bridge of his nose and whatnot. And you can see I'm just feathering on. I've got very thin down paint that I've wicked off a lot of the moisture, and I'm just using it to work around, and if I have to keep going back to the wet palette I will do, rather than just put a lot of paint on at once and have to move it around. And the idea is just picking out all these little curves, these little shapes, just so they highlight and stand out more. So now with the beard, because this frames the face, I wanted to look a bit more older, a bit more wizened, dwarf who's survived a long time, so we're going to go for a grey beard. So starting off with bright warm grey as a base coat, and I'm going to build up highlights, and then we're going to do little sort of accent areas where the white hair's getting through, as obviously this dwarf's getting a bit older, and just picking out really cool areas and little neat details. The sculpt on the beard is fantastic, and you can really go in and pick out all sorts of little bits of details on the miniature, which you'll see as we progress further with this painting. So you can see here, so just around the sides of his head, where his chin hair would be, just gone a little bit brighter with the grey, added a bit of white, and now we're going to go in with a slightly brighter colour, a bit more white mixed in, and just pick out some of these strands as if it looks like he's a bit older, and that white hair starting to grow through the grey that was already there, and it just accents and frames that skin a bit more and lets the warmth of the skin tone come through, because the actual hair itself is being more white, is a lot cooler, and you get a really nice contrast between the two colours. And then again adding a bit more white and just picking out a few of those little strands now, and just making it look like that white hair is growing right the way through. This will all get a nice dark tone wash, and then I'll go back in with the white and just pick out individual little hairs just to make it pop a bit more. Mainly focusing on the sort of crown of his head, the ends of the moustache, and this part of where the chin hair would be growing straight down here that I'm working on. And you can see here, so the wash has gone into the recesses, and now with just bold titanium white, just very gently just picking out a few little hairs here and there and the very tips, just to accentuate that contrast, and it just frames the face nicely and shows off the warmth of that skin a little bit more. So again, the idea behind this, I want the warmth of the skin to stand out a bit more, despite the fact it's actually quite bright, and I've gone in with some cooler colours for the highlights. So because it's framed by the grey and the white of the beard, I've gone for a blue tunic. So starting off with this ultramarine blue, get it down a couple of thin layers, just so you get really nice smooth coverage, and then just to accentuate the highlights, we're going to mix a slightly different colour in rather than a lighter blue, just to give it a bit more variation, a bit tonal difference as well, which you'll see. So rather than going in just with a lighter blue mixed in for the highlights, I've actually mixed in a colour, basically a jade green, and using this now for the highlights, then progressively going to add more and more of the jade in, and it's a really nice colour to cover over the blue. You get a nice variation. It's almost like makes the deeper parts of the blue almost look purpley, and then it goes into this almost greeny blue shade on top. At the moment, as it's going on wet here, obviously the colour doesn't pop as much through the camera, just until it dries, and then you'll see the variation in colours. It's a really nice mix for the green and the blue. And I'm not going into all the little recesses and areas, I'm only picking out areas where the brush can get to and anything that's facing upwards, so it gives a larger amount of contrast when you actually see it all dry. Now this is something I mentioned in other videos, but something I'm quite new to. I'm sure other people do this, but actually mixing your metallics. So I knew I wanted a silvery coloured armour for the chainmail, but what I've actually mixed in is so it's 2-to-1 chainmail with white gold. And the white gold, again, the idea with the contrasting in the warm tones, it gives a little bit of warmth to that otherwise cold silvery colour. And this is just going to go onto all of the chainmail. Again, thin coats, build up, do a couple of layers if you need to. The metallics they're always good, easy to work with, and this will just get a simple wash to bring it down. A really simple way, but it's a good thing to practice is mixing your metallics, because you'll be surprised what variations you can get. And it's, as I say, something quite new to me. I've never really done it before. It's only the last few months I've started doing it, and you can get some really nice shifts in tone and then contrast in your colours when you start mixing them. So into that same chainmail mix, I've added a little bit of normal gold just to warm it up a bit more, and I've used that for the actual scales on the shoulder pad, and then just gone for the normal silver around the rim. Now to actually wash, when you wash in metallics, it's always a really nice effect. It comes up nice, gets into all the little recesses, and especially for something as delicate as this with the chainmail rings, it really shows it off. One of the nice things you can do though is use different colour washes instead of just your traditional blacks or your non-oils and things. So what I've done is, in order for it to marry with the bluey green of the tunic, is on the actual chainmail I'm going to use a blue wash, just so you can see that again, that blue sort of running through the design. Same as on the little buckles for the actual tunic, where it's closed up on the chest and the stomach. That'll get the blue wash as well. And just around the rims of the actual scale mail, whereas the scale mail itself will get a warmer, because it's close to the face, I'm going to give it a warmer wash of a sepia tone instead. Another little tip you can do, you can see here I'm actually concentrating a heavier part of the wash in the recesses where the shoulder pad comes over the chainmail to darken that as well. And then what you can do is when you dry it off, do another layer of wash in those areas, and it just helps build up a shadow and gives it a bit more contrast rather than just a one colour wash over everything. Build up 2 or 3 layers and you can get a nice variation on the actual miniature or bust, whatever it is you're painting. And you can see here that it's starting to come together. That green and the blue is showing a little bit more, and the little variation between the warmth of the shoulder pads and the colder wash colour on the chainmail marries up. Now with all the buckles, quite simple, they're metallics again that are washed down and re-highlighted. But for belts, the reason I've included this little bit is when it comes to doing belts, you can obviously edge highlight and things, but because they're normally just a flat surface, there's no, unless the sculpt's got like bits of fabric hanging over and things, there's nowhere really for you to do much of in the way of sort of contrast. So what I tend to do is go for a very muted brown, add a highlight colour, usually something like a golden brown or even a sort of flesh colour, just to brighten it slightly. And then instead of worrying about big areas that are going to be sort of better lit on the model like you would with fabrics and things, instead is go through and just scratchy sort of paint jobs, add little bits up and down, left, right, just with the brush, go a bit random and just scratch on those details over the base layer. Just adds a bit more variation, a bit of texture to the actual miniature. And unless there's a big curve like here on the shoulder where you can actually go in with more of a light colour to accentuate the curve and show where the top of that is facing upwards, it gives you a bit more visual interest for what is otherwise quite a flat surface, and usually is not sort of under folds of different fabrics and things. So you can add more detail just by going in with a very thin down paint layer, get rid of a lot of the moisture off the brush and just go in and scratch highlights over the leather to make it feel a bit more worn and like I say, give it a bit more visual interest. So you can see the axe has had the metallics done. Again, a lot like the armour, I'm not going to spend too much time on that. But just to reiterate the point I made about the belt buckles, so same with the roll mat on his back here. So first of all, you just get your base green down, add your lighter colour, and it's really easy for something like this where it's rolled. You can get a nice highlighted layer, pick out the edges of the rolls itself and things like that. But then for the final sort of bit to highlight is you go in and, like I said with the belt buckles, and go in a bit scratchy, dab the brush, so you're leaving like weird little textures and marks on it and scratches and bits of roughness, just to give it a bit more visual interest after those initial layers. Another thing I'm doing as well is on the wet palette, because I've got 4 or 5 different colours, and I'm mixing in different shades to create different browns, just so certain leather straps look slightly different to the brown on the tankard or the pipe that's under his belt buckle there on his back and things, and the straps on the axe handle, bits like that. I'm actually mixing in like little bits of the green, little bits of the cooler colour, maybe some of the flesh tone. So you're using the same colour palette that's across the entirety of the miniature. But because they all come from the same sort of base range of colours, they do all sort of marry in their own way, because there's those other tones that are within other parts of the miniature, and it all sort of comes together and groups up, and it makes it feel a bit more unified in a colour scheme, if that makes sense. Now there was a video a couple of months back where I mentioned about getting back into miniature painting, and instead of just worrying about painting a whole miniature, is just concentrating on a single area. And for that video I did the shield. Now the process I used on that video, I'm going to use the exact same here and the same colours as well, because I really liked how it came out in the end. So the shield itself, although it's got this embossed metallic, which we'll figure out later on, for the wood, nice and simple, brown base coat. Something a bit darker then you can see the tanker that's hanging, just again so that you bit of a differentiation there in colour, so you don't want everything to match too much, but again using all the different little bits of browns that are on my wet palette. And then what I go in there is I get a really thin down layer of this, in particular for this, the green, but you could use whatever colour you wanted for the shield. And because the quality of the sculpt on this, there's little chips and dinks and bangs and scratches in the wood. There's where clearly like a sword's cut through, or where the actual panelling is that they've put together to create this shield. I'm just going in with very thin layers and scratchy highlighting on, and this will get 2 or 3 coats before we wash it down. And you'll see as I'm working through where I've started, and it's starting to dry and it's going a lot darker, and it's just a case of trusting the process, knowing that your paints will darken as they dry, so don't worry if it looks too vibrant as it goes on. But so long as you use a really thin down layer, don't go all the way to the edges of everything, deliberately leave some areas of the wood showing, and it all starts to add up and gives this texture of this really used and battered shield. Now that green's had about 2-3 layers at this point. It's then been heavily washed down with my own mix, which is basically non-oil Agrax Earthshade mixed together. That really darkens everything, gets into the recesses, makes all that little detail that's sculpted punch and pop on the model. And then exactly as I did on the first step, going in with the thin down green and going in and being very scratchy and picking out those little areas of wood, making sure I leave some of the previous layer on there, still leaving bits of brown showing. And you can see the visual contrast as it goes on it again, very bright. It does dry a little bit darker, but it gives a really nice variation in colour. It shows the texture of the shield off really nicely, I think. And you can even do stuff with this and use different colours. You could even freehand your own patterns and things like that. I did that on the shield tutorial for that previous video. Although I did a very simple pattern, it was nice to add it on to give it a bit more colour. And as you can see here, just going in, scratching on, and if certain areas might get a couple of extra layers, other areas won't, wherever I feel like there's more or less wear on the actual shield. And then to make the sort of metallic embossment pop, so I'm going in just with the chainmail paint because it's really bright. But again, to marry it with the front of the miniature, when it's done, it's going to get a blue sort of wash over it, so it has the same colour texture, almost as if it's made from the same metal as the chainmail. And then when that's dry, I'll then go in with the silver again, pick out those really sharp edges and those highlights. And then for the actual wood as well, to finish off, because I've used that wash and they dry quite glossy, the GW washes, I'll go in with a matte paint just to finish it off, and then just to dull it back down, and just so you don't see all the glossiness within all the little cracks of the shield and things. Also the metal rim of the shield, I'll go around and edge highlight those with this same silver, just to make that pop a little bit more as well. So as we finish the base up here, it's going to get the coal black pro acryl because it's a really nice black. It dries really nice and matte as well. When that's all dry, everything's going to get an ultra matte varnish on the base. And then again, just to go back to something I mentioned before in other videos, so what I tend to do is fabrics, so in this case his tunic, even little bits of his hair and his beard, to be fair, the roll mat on the back of his backpack, the wood on the shield, any other wooden bits will all get a matte varnish. Skin always gets a satin varnish. Metallics, I tend not to touch them because I want them to still shine a little bit. And then little things like, just to give a bit of variation, the belts will get a mixture of 1-to-1 matte and satin, just to make it pop a little bit more against the flatness of the tunic, which the matte varnish will provide. And then just go through, make sure everything gets a nice variation in those varnishes, because it does add to the final product. And then we'll get it all cleaned up and we'll see the final shots. And there he is finished. As I mentioned earlier, came third in the paint competition, which was really cool. really enjoyed painting this miniature. It's a lovely sculpt. There's a couple of things that I've missed, some of the cleanup which deducted me marks. I want to try more non-metallic metal and actually give that a proper go on miniatures as well, because I feel like that could elevate my painting a little bit more. And sometimes the metallic, because I do very basic with the metallics, they do stand out a bit too much compared to what they should be. But overall, very happy with this. The warmth of his face comes through because it's basically framed by that really cold contrasting beard and tunic as well. There's a couple of little things that I was told after the competition which I'm going to work on as well, which was cool. But it's a really fun paint job. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Any feedback or any questions or anything, please hit us up, and thank you, and we'll see you all on the next one. Cheers.